Groover, and I can't call him anything else because he was my professor at Atlantic Christian College more than 20 years ago. And I remember those classes, and I'll prove it. I'll prove it because I had a tendency then, as I still have, to doodle on paper while taking notes and listening in class. It's just part of my character. And so one day Dr. Groover brings in some pictures of cartoony kind of pictures that someone had drawn of various church leaders, and he called one, I think, the Campbellist or Campbellite pig. Is that one of those pictures? And he specifically mentioned that he brought those pictures in for me because I like to draw pictures during class. And I promised I was paying attention. That was Restoration History, I think was the name of the class. And it's the history of the disciples, the history of our movement. And over all these years, of course, Dr. Groover knew Ann and I when we were young and single and all that. And then after we got married, and he's been a good friend and a mentor over all these years, and has been available for many different things, which I don't have time to share with you now. Dr. Groover received his PhD at Emory University in church history. I don't know exactly the precise... American Studies, okay. I stand corrected. And he did his dissertation on Alexander Campbell, which he will share a little bit with us today. Also, as we were planning for today's service, and I was talking with Dr. Groover, talking with Jerry, and we were coordinating, you know how they say that great minds think alike. And in both cases, both gentlemen were thinking along the lines of our topic today, not just our heritage as disciples, a heritage of the Christian churches, but also at the center point of our heritage is the table. So you will get a chance to meet Dr. Groover afterwards. Please feel free to ask him any questions, ask him about any embarrassing information that you want to about Ann and myself. And in the meantime, let us begin. Our scripture this morning.
I want to share some stories from our heritage that focus on the significance of unity at the table. In the north of Ireland, and in Scotland too, Thomas Campbell had worked for years to reunite the branches of his denomination. He'd taken on a very difficult task. He sought to eliminate divisions among believers. Scots in Ireland took sides even on issues that did not really apply outside of Scotland. It was as though people were looking for almost any reason to justify fragmentation among believers. So Thomas Campbell was frustrated. He yearned for a better way. Maybe that was one of the reasons he was considering a change. Like many other Scotch-Irish of the day, he was drawn to what he was hearing about a fresh start in America. He was also coping with some health issues, and his physician suggested a change of climate might be helpful. Maybe a sea voyage. That's my kind of doctor. So, Thomas Campbell made up his mind. He would go to America. His wife and children would remain in Ireland for the time being. They would come and join him once he was established in the New World. So we boarded a ship in Londonderry in the spring of 1807 and arrived in Philadelphia 35 days later. The synod with which he would be affiliated was actually meeting in the city, that city, at that time. Soon he was on his way westward. He was eager to begin his ministerial duties in southwestern Pennsylvania. Not quite the frontier, but almost the Wild West of that day. By stagecoach or wagon. It took him about 2 weeks to make the 350-mile journey across the mountains to Washington, Pennsylvania. Soon after he arrived there, Campbell began laboring among churches in that thinly populated region. He stood before one of those little congregations on a Sunday morning that summer. He preached in preparation for communion. He urged unity and deplored party spirit. Who knows what he was thinking on that day? I'm sure ideas were flooding in upon him. Perhaps he was thinking about opportunities in the new world, a blank slate. It was an Eden of sorts, a place of new beginnings. Perhaps he was wondering why he should perpetuate customs that encouraged the very party spirit that he opposed. What he did that day was consistent with views on Christian unity that he'd held for years. As he looked out over the congregation, he knew that some did not belong to that particular flock. Some did not even belong to the particular fragment of a fragment of a fragment of Christendom to which he belonged. He knew well the restrictions that had originated on the other side of the Atlantic. The practice he was expected to follow was to offer communion only to members in good standing of that particular fragment. A number of other religious groups did the same thing, after all. The table was fenced, metaphorically, of course, but he knowingly opened the door. On that day, in that place at least, the unity that Campbell yearned for would be realized. So he invited all of the believers who were there that day to participate in the sacramental meal. They gave thanks to the same Lord. They shared the same meal. What happened in that little congregation that day might have gone unnoticed had Thomas Campbell not been accompanied by a colleague in ministry. This man regarded with alarm what he was witnessing. He said nothing at the time, but he was soon spreading word of Campbell's violation of accepted practice. Would this newcomer be doing the same thing again? What would this lead to? Complaints against Campbell multiplied as this conversation proceeded. By all accounts, Thomas Campbell was a thoughtful, conciliatory man. He was not itching for a fight, but he soon found himself embroiled in controversy. Disciplinary proceedings were initiated against this man, this alumnus of Glasgow University, this seminary-educated man, this man whose vocabulary and accent set him apart from many of his contemporaries. As disciplinary proceedings moved from jurisdiction to jurisdiction over the months that followed, Campbell grew increasingly discouraged. Finally, reluctantly, he withdrew from the ministry of the denomination that he had faithfully served for so long. He withdrew for the sake of peace. He set off into uncharted territory, not because he did not care for the congregations to which he had been assigned, but rather because he cared for the church universal. Meanwhile, Thomas Campbell had sent word to his family to join him in the summer of 1808. They boarded the ship and sailed out of the harbor with high hopes. Soon, however, a storm drove the ship aground off the coast of Scotland. It was late in the summer, and Jane Campbell and her children were shaken by the experience. The decision was made. They would not risk another voyage at that late date in the season. They would remain in Scotland until the following summer. Making the most of this development, the eldest son, Alexander, enrolled in the University of Glasgow. One of the most important events during his year in Glasgow took place not in a university classroom, but in the Seceder Church in that city. For a variety of reasons, not the least of which was his father's influence, Alexander was growing increasingly passionate about Christian unity. As a communion Sunday approached, this university student went to the church, gave the right answers to the questions he was asked, and was given a metal token. This communion token certified that he was a member in good standing of his denomination. He was expected to exchange this token for the loaf and the cup on the day of the service. Yes, unusual as it sounds, that was the custom. In an unsettled state of mind, Alexander went to the service. He had been worshiping in several churches of various denominations during his stay in Glasgow. But he wondered, was he not guilty of implying that only one kind of believer was genuine when he participated in a sacramental service that excluded other believers? Approaching the table, as he was expected to do on that day, he concluded that he could not partake in good conscience. He simply put his token on the table and left the church building. Those who looked on must have been puzzled by this odd behavior. Now, we don't have access to all the letters that were written between Thomas and Alexander Campbell during those days, so we cannot know what Alexander Campbell knew about his father's attitude at the time that he placed that token on the table